Honourable Leanne Dalziel.
Mr Chairman, I want to speak on part one of this bill because I'm very concerned about comments that the Minister's made in response to some of the issues that have been raised. One of the things that's so frustrating about the process that we're going through is that we get a briefing at 11, well actually the Minister was late, so about 11:45 I think by the time he arrived, on a draft bill, and then the bill was introduced yesterday afternoon, but of course this will show up in Hansard as the 30th of March, although everywhere else in the country it's the 31st of March because of the rather quaint rules that we have around urgency. And that is because all of this will go through all of its stages on the 30th of March. That's how it will be recorded in Hansard. The problem that I have with this process is that there hasn't been an opportunity for the broader engagement that one would expect. And even in the Rodney District Council case, there were 80 submissions heard on that particular case. There were hearings, there was public input, and actually there was a good deal of consensus, as we've already heard from my colleague, the Honourable Ruth Dyson, with respect to both sides of the House recognising what was in the best interest of the Council and knowing that it was only 18 months away from an election. In this case, 6 months before a local body election, we're told that another 3.5 years have to go by where the democratic deficit is applied to the people of Canterbury. And all I'm saying to the Minister, if he had actually met with the other parties in the House, and I know that he's preferred those that might have a support agreement with the government, but if he'd talked right across the board, we actually could have worked through what was the best way to resolve this issue. Now, the thing that is not going to get enough consideration and debate in this House, unless we really go through it with a fine-tooth comb, is the Wyatt Creech report. Now, I got attacked by the Minister for daring to suggest that he had a conflict of interest. He did have a conflict of interest. It is a conflict of interest. Whether it is perceived or real, it is still a conflict of interest. And the Minister well knows that a conflict of interest, whether it's perceived or real, has to be notified. It has to be. And a Minister, even with a perceived conflict of interest, has to withdraw from decision-making to be on the safe side, as the Minister well knows. Now, what I want to say about the quality of this report is that it is not a robust report. And I certainly wouldn't want to have anyone in this country think for 1 minute that this is sufficient quality reporting for the kind of decision that this Parliament is being forced to make today. Mr Speaker, the reason that it is poor quality is because it is based so much on anecdote. And I've got several aspects of this report that I want to go through. The first one that I want to mention is in relation to the allegations that have been made as to the nature of the dysfunction or the complaints around dysfunction around ECAN's governance. And let me just read into the record the actual statement from the report. Almost all external parties interviewed had a negative perception of ECAN's governance. There is a widely held view that councillors are so polarised at times that they are dysfunctional as a group. There is insufficient leadership and the council is too busy protecting individual party perspectives and fails to pay sufficient attention to leading the region. Our investigation did not bear this out. Did anyone miss that? Our investigation did not bear this out. ECAN is meeting its legal obligations under the Local Government Act, but has been unable to establish a firm planning environment which flows through to poor relationships and decisions under the RMA. So it's the planning function. Who's responsible for the planning function? For employing the people that work in planning and consent? And let's go through that, because that's the Chief Executive's job, not the job of the Council. So let me look at the section on that, on the question of the capability within the Environment Canterbury itself with respect to the staff. And here it goes. It's an entire section, 3.1.3, staffing and use of resources, leadership and direction. There is a lack of overall resource management content leadership within the consenting section. Senior management are not RMA experts, Mr Chairman.
Leanne Dalzell.
And have backgrounds from outside the sector. Senior management are not able to provide leadership and direction on the RMA and the consenting functions other than process components. This understanding of the RMA has been left to the third-tier managers and team leaders, some of whom have been in ECAN for a long time and do it how they have always done it, according to some internal staff and external people interviewed. The issue of leadership of the consenting function is significant and has had implications in terms of timeframe management as well as the quality of the consenting process. And then it goes on to talk about the nature of the consenting process as it was over 2 years ago, and completely fails to look at the rates of consenting that has been adopted since the time that this report was referring to. And over again within this report, according to some internal staff and external people interviewed, unnamed, and then a statement in here that in fact the comments are anecdotal and that there is no evidence to back them up. So here's a really good one: relationship with applicants and submitters. There is clearly a major perception gap between internal and external views of ECAN. All external applicants spoken to raised concerns around perceived intransigence of staff to accept the decisions made by hearings commissioners. The Environment Court have set precedent. Concern was also expressed that processes are extremely slow and that if ECAN lose a case, staff actively slow processes down and impose unworkable or impractical conditions. NB, this is anecdotal, and we have not been provided any evidence to substantiate this assertion. And then they go on to list the common themes raised by external parties. And what do we have? Intransigence when confronted with challenging situations. ECAN not getting its own way and deliberately slowing processes down or reacting publicly. Science-led rather than science-informed. Large numbers of staff are green in orientation. A vacuum of economic, social or cultural consideration. Mr Speaker, this report is outrageous. It would never, ever withstand judicial review because of the quality of the advice that it gives is based almost entirely on anecdote. And let's just go through this scenario. Let's say a National Party Member of Parliament living in Timaru approached the local Timaru Mayor and said to the Mayor, look, our two ministers would actually quite like to get stuck into ECAN. Could you arrange for the mayors to write a letter? And so a letter is written to the ministers. But what is interesting about the letter that is written to the ministers is that it completely breaches the process that has been agreed to between the Mayoral Forum and ECAM, which is a heads-up, no surprises approach. And even that is mentioned in the report, that the mayors themselves did not bother to even consult with their own councils, not one. The ECAN councillor, Joe Kane, did an Official Information Act request to all of the mayors, all of the councils in the region. Mr Chairman, she did an Official Information Act request to all of them, and what did she find out? Not one of them had it debated in their local councils. Not one. So we've got the mayors making these decisions on their own behalf, not consulting with other elected people. And what happens? The entire elected function, the democratic function of our environmental protector, our environmental regulator, is completely out the window. And there have been a lot of concerns raised about this. Now, Jo Kane was interesting in the Timaru Herald this morning. She said, I feel like I've been on The Apprentice and Donald Trump has told me that I'm fired. Except this time it's not Donald Trump, it's Rodney Hyde and Nick Smith, or Jekyll and Hyde, as they could be called. So, Mr Speaker, the problem is that what's happened is that we've seen this report coming to this Parliament by way of a letter from the Minister just a couple of months ago. No engagement with the broader stakeholders. I think 20 groups were consulted in the development of the Creech report. We certainly haven't been consulted about our way forward. I don't know how long the Minister's spent with each individual council